Hi, my name is Danica and today I have my April wrap-up. As always, most of the lesbian books that I have mentioned are reviewed at the Lesbury, and I will link those down below. The first book I read this month was M&O Forever by Tanya Sherry Hageman. This is a teen young adult book, and it's quite short, but it's not really a light read. Because it's so short, it's really easy to spoil, so I won't say a lot about it, except that it's about kind of discovering your own identity and letting go. Interwoven into this story that's mostly about these two teenage girls, there's also a folktale about a runaway slave named Hannah, and these two stories interact really well with each other and kind of add depth to the story. I really enjoyed this one. It's thoughtful and interesting, and it tackles racism and homophobia and loss. It was definitely an interesting, thoughtful read. The next book I read was one that was sent for review at the Lesbury, but it turned out to not really have enough queer woman content to justify reviewing it there, and that's The Ease Path by Ebah Sunlei. This is a sci-fi novel, but it actually reminded me more of books that would be like in the New Age section, kind of crystals and energy. It had some interesting points to it, and I liked the queer supporting characters, but it just didn't really come together for me. And then I listened to an audiobook, which is Flight by Sherman Alexie. This is a teen book. Again, it's about a teenage native boy who's growing up in foster care, and it's basically about his rage and trying to come to terms with it and deal with it. This is a really powerful book. I found it really moving. The audiobook is done by Adam Beach, who is a native actor. He was in Smoke Signals and a bunch of other movies, and I think listening to it as an audiobook really elevated the story. Adam Beach does a fantastic job with it, and it's so emotional. I was actually like blinking back tears in public while listening to it, so I would definitely recommend this one. I did have some problems with it, but overall it was really moving. Then I read Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. This is the first Audre Lorde book that I have read. And though I'm really glad that I finally picked up something by her, I kind of wish that I had started with her poetry. I think that her prose, like Zammy and Sister Outsider, are more well known now, but she talks in Sister Outsider about poetry as basically like her first language and where her theory springs from, and I kind of regretted that I hadn't read some of her poetry first, because I think that would have been more rewarding going into Sister Outsider. It was still a really great, interesting read, and I'll definitely be picking up more from her, but I think that probably would have been like a better base to start from with her work. And then I read Searching for Whitopia by Rich Benjamin. This is a story about all white communities in the US and kind of how they came to be and why they're becoming more popular, and the idea is really interesting. But in practice, I found that it felt a little bit padded. The author is a journalist, and they read more like individual articles to me than as a cohesive book, and he just kind of goes off on tangents about describing this house and all of the architectural details in it for a while, or why he really likes golf for a long time, and I found those not interesting at all. And then also the tone of the book I didn't really agree with. It felt a little bit like it was excusing white people for systemic racism more than necessary. One of the things that bothered me was that he would go into these communities that were not only all white, but also like the individuals were quite racist a lot of the time, and then he would talk about how nice they were, which seemed weird to me. Like, they're super racist, you don't really need to talk about, but like other than that, they're super nice. Yeah, it just didn't really sit well with me. Then there was the Dewey's 24-hour readathon, and the first book I picked up after I finished Searching for Whitopia was Autobiography of a Family Photo by Jacqueline Woodson. I recently read another book by Jacqueline Woodson that was a teen book that was also kind of this size, so I thought this would be a similar read, but it turns out that this was not a quick, light read at all. It's quite bleak, and it's also almost like poetry. Like, you just get little glimpses at his family's life, and then you have to kind of extrapolate from there. So this book I think would work a lot better if you give yourself time to really reflect on each chapter instead of reading it all in one sitting quite quickly like I did. So I found this interesting, but it definitely wasn't what I was expecting. It's a dark, book. The next book I read during the readathon was Ascension by Jacqueline Koyanagi. This is a sci-fi story and has a fantastic, diverse cast. It has a main character with a chronic illness, which isn't really something I've read about before. She is also Black and a lesbian, and I thought these intersections added such depth to the story, which was already rich and a page-turner. And basically this book made me really impatient that there aren't a ton more like this. Like, obviously you can have an amazing diverse cast and still have this great page-turner of a story, so why isn't there a lot more like this? I am eagerly awaiting more from this series, but also just more in this genre that show that you don't need to have the same kind of cis, white, straight, male protagonist without disabilities, that there are a lot more options out there and that they add to your story, they make it better. So I loved this. I would highly recommend it to anyone. It was a really fun read and very thoughtful. I thought the writing was really well done as well. Like, the plot was very interesting. This was my favorite read of the month. The last book I finished during the readathon was Eye of Yop City by Margarita Bouet. This is a graphic novel, and I thought it was the first book in the series, but it turns out it's the second. That's fine, I didn't notice it while I was reading it. It's about 3 teenage girls on the Ivory Coast in the 1970s, and it's just sort of their everyday lives. It's a really great, quick, entertaining read. I really enjoyed it. I'll definitely be going forward with the series, but I guess first I'll have to backtrack and read the first one, but then I'll definitely be continuing with it. I really enjoyed it. And the book that I started during the readathon but I didn't finish until later was Baby G by Ebah. This book made me feel very conflicted. You might want to read my review for more about it, but basically the way that it dealt with power dynamics and consent made me feel really uncomfortable, and I'm not sure if that's what the author intended or not. If I was supposed to feel really gross after reading it and uncomfortable, then it definitely did its job, but it wasn't really an enjoyable read to me. It was interesting, and it felt realistic, and it made me think, but it was not enjoyable. Last book I finished this month was another audiobook, which was My Education by Susan Choi, and this is a story about a grad student who enters into this drama with one of her professors and his wife, and it's kind of this tawdry, dramatic love affair. If you like reading about that kind of destructive but passionate love affair, then you'll probably like this book. If that's just me, then I probably revealed too much about myself. But I enjoy reading about that kind of relationship. I thought it was really well done. Also, a protagonist that's a bisexual woman of color is always going to pique my interest. I think this is another one that worked really well as an audiobook, so I would recommend the audiobook. And those were all the books that I read in April. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, and if you have a wrap-up, feel free to link it down below and I'll definitely check it out. And thank you for watching. Bye!